even as we were thinking about the design of this solution and the alliance at an overall level, we were looking at, and we were trying to take into account a couple of different things: what's worked before and what hasn't, to kind of factor for that, and also keeping in mind the fact that as an action lab, our role is to seed something, but ideally it needs to have a life of its own. It needs to be institutionalized, and it needs to then grow by itself. So when we kind of broke it down, we tried to look at, and we tried to, I would say, look at how do we achieve these various principles that we considered core to the alliance design. From our perspective, what we thought was, innovative and therefore creating higher likelihood towards success is building from within. Again, as Ragini had suggested earlier, we had two options. One is coming as kind of, as outsiders and pointing out that things are not being done in a certain way, as opposed to working with people who are already in the industry and are aligned to build from from within. The other was, again, taking a very problem solving approach and looking at what are the processes and structures and trying to address those in a more realistic manner, as opposed to, again, just calling out statistics and calling out that certain things are not being done well. From a sort of an equitable perspective, we wanted to make sure that this whole alliance is co-created. I would say that that was a key design principle from us, not just from the perspective of being equitable, but also from it having real skin in the game. We all know that when something comes from us and comes from kind of an internal team, it's much more likely to get traction and to stick than if something is just applied from outside. Again, we looked at the co-creation and the sort of building from within aspect of it as enabling sustainability. Our role, the way we saw it, was to seed this, to provide some early inputs, to provide secretarial support to some extent, but to really set this up in such a way that the core group of funders was able to run with it, and then the additional members who joined would then be incentivized to also take this forward on an ongoing basis. We were looking at really systemic behavior change, but trying to do it in a way that is not too obvious. So addressing it from the perspective of processes. Investment at the end of the day is a very sort of tangible business. It lends itself to measurement. So there are actual numbers that we could look at, and that for us was also very attractive. And we were looking at how this can get built first, for example, in India, in such a way that the learnings and the structure and the design can be replicated and scaled both first domestically and then internationally. Working with the LPs is critical, because unless that imperative comes from the person who's providing the funds, this is always a nice to have. It's never a need to have, in spite of all of the data that Ragini presented around women entrepreneurs being significantly more successful, having more profitable businesses, and also working across the breadth of the entire innovation ecosystem. While data is important, I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done. And this really is actually coming from some conversations that we had with ecosystem enablers outside of India, who are starting to see traction 3, 4, 5 years into their journey, which is around the communications aspect of it and sharing enough of these case studies of really strong successful women entrepreneurs, which is when it becomes clear to funders that there is a very strong opportunity here. And then finally, I think you need to continue to have and hold a space for investors to come in and share their challenges, because there are a lot of legacy issues that funders need to be able to deal with. Working constructively and in a problem-solving approach, it cannot be something that is just provided top-down. Even if it is something that comes as a mandate from LPs, there has to be enough support, peer networks that get created so that investors and funders can exchange notes with each other on what's working, what isn't, where they are finding challenges and how other people are overcoming those challenges. Because these are, I would say, real societal issues that need to be overcome. The funding community is not going to be able to change certain societal issues around, for example, how childcare is viewed. But they can exchange notes on how does that then get mitigated or addressed or buffered for within certain of their portfolio companies or certain of their team members. So having that space to have candid conversations where people are not getting called out, I think is a critical piece.
So from our learnings, what has emerged is that there are some things that can be done to change the challenges that we had sort of faced in setting this alliance up, and also uh, you know what we could achieve in that time. So what we realize is that it is not going to happen that we bring the uh, sort of investors together and it will get its own legs. What it requires is a more uh, targeted approach with a full-time team working with it, because right now for investors, this is not their top priority. And so if there are other people taking on the load, then probably we can get more support from them, because if they just have to come and share ideas. And again, like Maya talked about, there are certain market cycles. You had a funding winter, then you had the SVB issue happening. So there are always top of the mind issue which threaten the survival of the fund and their investees. So maybe an independent team working outside, taking the load of day-to-day management would be helpful. Another thing is that something like this would take time. So it can't be done in a project mode in 9 months or 12 months. It requires a dedicated effort for at least 2 years. And then this should become part of an already existing industry body. We've given some examples in an Indian ecosystem like Indian Venture Capital Association or Impact Investor Council, but there could be others, and we'll be happy to get your suggestions on, so that it becomes part of a body where investors meet anyway. So it's not like an extra effort going out and, creating another network. That is one. And again, there's a lot to learn from what 2X Global has achieved. And is there a possibility of alignment or partnership at that level? These are things to be explored, that if there are some global initiatives happening, how can we plug in and get more out of it? And I think LPs also, like Maya said, LPs are an important stakeholders. They also need to think about if there is a mandate and intention to serve women entrepreneurs, and since there is no data to prove the business case yet in certain geographies like India, what are the other incentive I can create which, let's say, defrays certain additional costs of reaching women entrepreneurs, or incentivizes them for making the effort before the outcome is achieved. So basically, to answer this question, which a fund manager might ask, what is it in for me, or why should I be good? Because in the end, I'm only measured for the returns I get. Nobody cares about the construction of my portfolio, right? So that is the one thing. But overall, we strongly believe that in this kind outcomes for women entrepreneurs cannot be achieved without involvement of investors, and that too in an industry, not a niche but industry-wide, self-driven, and it should be on a mission mode to achieve the kind of, because we don't want to wait for 200 years when the equity happens. None of us will be here to see that. So, we want this to happen in our lifetimes.